Okay, so I've been talking a lot about how the, how the family can promote positive growth and development in adolescents and adults on the autism spectrum. And I've shown you examples of where the reciprocal influences have not happened. But I'm going to show you some examples where they do. Because we all know that having a son or daughter or a grandson or a granddaughter on the spectrum or a sibling has an effect on families. I mean, it would be trivializing the experience to say that it doesn't. And I have data to show you what those effects, at least some of those effects are. And I hope that the data are useful in inspiring, again, advocacy for adult services that are targeted with your family members in mind, not necessarily with other people with developmental disabilities. So we ask, what are the impacts of the behavior problems of adolescents or adults on the spectrum on their mothers? And this is work, again, Dr. Leanne Smith was critically involved with this, leading some of this effort. And we asked, this is the part of our study that I referred to briefly, the daily diary study. And we asked, how does the daily life of mothers of individuals with ASD differ from the daily life of mothers without children with disabilities regarding her daily stress? And we're interested in the biological impacts of daily stress. And for this study, we again focused only on the families where the individual with ASD was still living at home with the mothers. And but at this point in our study, most of the sons and daughters were in their either very late teen years or were in adulthood. So this is really mothers of adults with ASD. And it's this Time 5 daily diary and cortisol study that I'm reporting on now, which is, we took a break from our usual 18-month break between visits to do something different that I'll be telling you about now. So at Time 5, instead of visiting the family in their home and doing these long interviews and collecting the kind of data I've been talking about thus far, for 8 consecutive days, we conducted telephone interviews with the mothers at the end of the day. Actually, these telephone interviews were conducted by the Survey Center at Penn State University, because we imported this whole part of our study from a national study, and we wanted to have national data to understand how the lives of mothers of individuals with autism spectrum disorders may be different. And their data were collected by the Penn State University Survey Center, so we had them do these daily interviews. So every evening for 8 consecutive days, the mothers were called on the phone, and in the evening, they talked about what they did during the day. We had structured questions on time use, on daily stress, on daily positive events, ratings of their mood during the day, and also ratings of their physical health symptoms. And so it's a whole different tempo, because it was like a microscopic look on 8 consecutive days in the lives of these moms, using almost exactly the same questions that were used in this big, large national study. And then on days 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the 8 days, the mothers were asked to collect 4 saliva samples each day when they woke up, before they got out of bed, before they brushed their teeth. 30 minutes later, actually before they had coffee and before they brushed their teeth. It's asking a lot just to think about that part. And then right before lunch and right before they went to sleep. So we had these 4 saliva samples, and they chewed on salivettes, which are sort of cotton wads, like when you go to the dentist and they have those cotton wads. So that's what the mothers in our study were asked to do, to collect saliva samples that then they shipped back to us in special shipping packs, and we were able to measure from that cortisol, which is a hormonal measure of stress. And just to tell you, we wanted to know what we were asking of the participants in our study, so we also participated in the saliva collection. And I could tell you, it's hard to wait until after 30 minutes to brush your teeth and have coffee. So I guess we induced some stress as well as So in addition to the data we collected about the mothers from our adolescents and adults with autism study, we had this very large potential comparison sample from this national study called MIDAS, Midlife in the US. And so there are a 1,500 person sample of individuals all over the country who also participated in this daily diary study. But we selected a matched comparison group who were identical with the mothers in our study, identical on level of education, on income, on marital status, and they all had either an older teen or young or adult child living at home with them, but the child did not have disabilities. So this comparison group was really an extremely well-matched comparison group from this nationally representative study, and they had the same daily diary and cortisol data that we collected from our mothers, or that the Penn State Survey Center collected on our behalf from our mothers. So this is what we learned, and I think it's pretty interesting, both in terms of the differences and the similarities. So the greenish bars are the mothers in our study, and the bluish bars are the comparison group. And what you see is the stars tell you where there's a significant difference. And what we see is that this is the number of hours during the day, averaged across the 8 days, that the mothers reported doing childcare. And not surprisingly, the mothers of adolescents and adults with autism reported about an hour, more than an hour more childcare on average across the 8-day period. That's not surprising. They also reported spending more time doing household chores than the comparison group. Again, that's not surprising. And they reported significantly less of their own leisure time, with the exception of watching TV, which was constant across the two groups. And what we didn't see that we expected to see was differences in the number of hours they reported sleeping or working. And no one's doing enough physical activity, that's obvious. We knew that before the study. But so I really expected to see less sleep. But I think in subsequent analyses, we're beginning to understand that the quality of sleep is affected, if not the hours of sleep on average. And there's not that much recall bias when you're asked every day, how did you spend your time during the previous day? If we ask this, over an 18-month period, of course there would be recall errors, but this is closer to like real-time data collection. So this is another slice of life here, and that is the percentage of days in this 8-day diary study where mothers reported either feelings of deep fatigue or when they reported having interference from work. So deep fatigue, we see that on about 50% of the days in the diary study, mothers of individuals with autism reported feelings of fatigue. And that's twice as much as the matched comparison mothers who didn't have children with disabilities. And then when we look at the percentage of days where there was interference with work. So this meant having to go in late because of an appointment or having to leave early, or again, these questions were not tied to the child with autism. This was just differences. But we have an inference that we're making that some of these differences were because of the son or daughter with autism. It could have been a phone call that was received because of something going on during the day with the son or daughter. It didn't mean that they weren't necessarily working, but that there was something that happened that interfered with their work. For the comparison group, it was about 8% of the days, and for the mothers of adolescents and adults with autism, it was, I think, 22% exactly. So when you think about your average, 20% of the days is like, one time a week, that something happens that it's some large or small way interfering with work. I think there's significant sort of policy implications of that, as well as health implications of the feelings of fatigue. So this shows mothers' daily stress. And in all these measures of daily stress, and again, these were designed for the larger nationally representative study, and we just asked about them. For all of those measures, the mothers of adolescents and adults with autism were significantly more likely to experience stress, a higher percentage of the days during the diary study when they were feeling stress than the comparison group. So the first pair of bars shows arguments. So they had arguments on about 25% of the days, and that's about twice as many days in the diary study than the comparison group women reported. And then there's avoided arguments. We all know what those are. That's when you could have had an argument, you decided it wasn't worth it, you just wouldn't say anything. But that's still stressful. And you see that there's more of those for the mothers in our study than for the comparison group, and also more stress at work. The stress at work was not arguments or avoided arguments. It was setting those aside, what other sources of stress were experienced at work. And the biggest magnitude difference was stress at home, not surprisingly, for mothers in our study compared to the comparison group. And also network stress. And this was stress in the lives of people you love and care about. If someone you care about is sick or having difficulties, then that's stress that you experience. And again, talking to the grandparents in this room, what motivates the grandparents network is this feeling of concern and worry about the people that you love, your grandchildren, your children. And that was asked about in this larger study, and you see that there's, again, about twice as many days where the mothers in our study reported having these feelings of stress associated with, or concerns associated with what's happening in the lives of their friends and family members. There was also a very wonderful exchange of emotional support that was higher in the mothers in our study as compared to the mothers of kids with, or adolescents and adults without disabilities. There were significantly more days when they gave emotional support and received emotional support than the comparison group. And again, you know, when you think about what you're doing here today, it takes time to be positive and to give and receive support. But I guess that's part of the point, is it does take as well as give. The exchange of support is not cost-free. I also want to show you that we added 1 or 2 questions to the diary study that were just for our families because they wouldn't apply to the others. And this is a picture of the daily behavior problems during these 8 days. And I just want you to, I've stressed behavior problems, and I'm going to continue to stress behavior problems because this is the one area that I think we have to really ramp up the service system during adolescence and adulthood and ask for more and get more on behalf of our family members who have a spectrum diagnosis. So the bar all the way on the right asks if during the 8-day period there was at least 1 episode of behavior problems, and 94% of the mothers reported at least 1 episode of behavior problems during the 8-day diary period. So it's ubiquitous. Families during late adolescence and adulthood are dealing with behavior problems, not as much as during childhood, as I'll show you in a few minutes, but this is a characteristic of parenting, adolescents and adults on the spectrum. But the type of behavior problem varied in frequency, and you could see those data as well. So repetitive behaviors, not surprisingly, were reported by about 80% of the mothers reported that about 80% of their sons and daughters had at least 1 episode of repetitive behaviors during the 8-day period. Fewer, close to 60%, or around 60%, had either episodes of being withdrawn or uncooperative, and about 45% had at least 1 episode of socially offensive behavior during the 8-day diary period. Less frequent, but certainly more disturbing, 20 to 25% of the mothers reported that their son or daughter during this 8-day period were either destructive of property or aggressive toward other people or self-injurious. So 20 to 25% during this later stage of life, during an 8-day period, had at least 1 episode of one of these types of behaviors. And I can imagine that some of you feel that this is characteristic of what you experience, and some of you feel that this is more severe than what you experience, but this is sort of a cross-section of what an 8-day period in the lives of families, what kinds of behavior problems were reported by these mothers. And so not only are they prevalent, but these statistics are based on at least 1 episode. It may be that there's multiple episodes daily, and there are individuals in our study where this happens every day, so that this is not the full picture. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to show you all of the different ways that we've analyzed the behavior problem data, but just to say that this is a concern not just during early childhood, but also as the son or daughter grows up and becomes a late adolescent or an adult as well. So that's a big, big need.